To speak and the opportunity to tell you about a project we've been chipping away at for 5 years now. I think we'll be done in 6, but we've been chipping away. So that's the fish barrier assessment in tributaries to the St. Lawrence River. And my goal here today is to try to give you a very broad overview of a very detailed project. So I'm going to glaze over a lot of the details. I'll have my email at the end and phone number, or catch me here, and we can get down into the nitty-gritty, but I don't have time for that now, but so it might raise some eyebrows. We'll see. So I just want to provide a brief background of what the FEMREF is, kind of highlight our project objectives, tributary assessment methodologies, and then provide kind of a status update of what's been completed to date, and the broad findings thus far, and that's kind of at the 10,000 foot level. And then highlight a couple mitigation projects that we've completed, and then wrap up with a brief summary. So the FEMREF is the Fish Enhancement Mitigation and Research Fund, and it's a multi-million-dollar settlement with the New York Power Authority for the relicensing of the St. Lawrence Power Project, and the Fish and Wildlife Service manages that fund. The purpose of the FEMREF is to benefit fisheries resources in the Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence River Basin, and continue research on the American eel and other species that may be affected by the power project. Our priority species are American eel, lake sturgeon, muskellunge, northern pike, walleye, eastern sand darter, moon-eye, and pug-nosed shiner. So how do we get started in this? Basically, we have a limited understanding of fish barriers and tributaries to the St. Lawrence River on the U.S. side, both in extent and the potential impacts of such. So our overall goal was to comprehensively evaluate tributaries with a phased approach. So these 3 phases are fish barrier assessments, in-stream habitat assessments, and fish community assessments. So the way we tackle a stream is that first year we do the barrier assessments. Later in the year we go back and do the in-stream habitat work. And then the following year, after those barriers have been identified, we go back in to do the fish community work, which includes migratory fish community work and the resident fish community. So the project outcomes, when we started this, we were hopeful to have barrier evaluations and ranking, quantity and quality of restricted suitable spawning habitat, and then existing fish use, again, both migratory and resident fish. And these outcomes will identify tributaries and fish barriers to focus this FEMREF-funded mitigation efforts. So back to that functional habitat component, the idea is that if you can increase the availability of suitable spawning habitat, that we might be able to affect fish production. So where do we start to try to identify these barriers? It's mostly a desktop review at that point. So we use GIS to plot out the road tributary intersection. So basically where a blue line crosses a road. From there we take basically a virtual flyover using high resolution imagery to then kind of identify additional sites. And then obviously every year we still have a few field discoveries while we're out in the field. So then we visit those sites and we do the standardized barrier assessment data collection that most folks do out of the Vermont kind of manual, including some of the North Atlantic aquatic connectivity cooperative information. In addition, we take longitudinal and cross-sectional stream profiles. So then we use a modified protocol developed by SUNY Plattsburgh that takes 4 parameters and ranks barriers as either high, medium, or low for impediment for fish passage. So those 4 parameters are outlet drop, water velocity, culvert to stream wetted width ratios, and culvert to stream water depth ratios. So again, some people might be raising their eyebrows a bit because this was designed for brook trout, and it is. So we've taken it and through literature kind of modified that water velocity and outlet drop to kind of create a bit of our own model. And it may not be 100% accurate, but it gives us a benchmark baseline that we can evaluate all tributaries by. And the upshot is that we've collected all the data on these structures, and we can ultimately go back in and run fish crossing on any specific structure. So all the data is collected, and we go from there. So next we characterize and assess existing habitat conditions with a focus on those restricted reaches that are precluded by fish barriers. And then we use a transect-based protocol to basically record substrate size, embeddedness, in-stream cover, depth, velocity, riffle pebble counts, riparian conditions, and so on. And then other restoration opportunities are documented when we're in the field, such as severely eroding banks, barnyard and agricultural issues, cattle in the stream, that sort of thing. And lastly, we do fish community assessments. And much of this is driven by the fact that there's not a lot of good fisheries data on many of these tributaries. So we achieve the migratory fish component by blocking off the entire stream with a trap net, low in the watershed. And then all the captured fish we tag and release above the net. Then we have additional nets set above those perceived barriers that we've identified in the watershed. So these nets are fished from that March-April timeframe, and the lowest net is fished all the way through June. And the idea is to attempt to capture all migratory fish, including some of our non-game native fishes that we have interest in, like the red horse suckers. Later in the year, during low flow, we come back out with backpack electrofishers and seines and document the resident fish community. So this picture in the background there is Mullet Creek, and that's one of our trap nets early in the season. So the cod end is pointing upstream. So we have kind of a modified trap net. The wings are 1.5 inch mesh, and they're rebarred in. So any fish coming up gets guided into that box. And the fun part is this time of year, you got to pull the net every day when you check it, bust up that ice and let it flow through so you can, so it doesn't collapse under pressure. It's work at that time of year. So our goal again is to evaluate all tributaries that may be available to main stem St. Lawrence fish, including tributaries below dams on the 4 major tributaries, the Oswegatchie, the Grass, the Racket, and the St. Regis. So again, I probably don't have to put this group in perspective, but Lake Ontario is in the lower right, or left, and the St. Lawrence Power Project's in the upper right. And those black chevrons are dams in the system. So again, we've been at this 5 years. The first 4 years, we focused on what we're calling the upper river tributaries, so that's above the hydro project. So now I draw your attention to the colors. So anything in blue, we've not assessed at all. So then the other colors, the red, yellows, and greens are basically just how many of those components we've been able to accomplish. So tributaries that are red, we've only done fish barrier assessments, and those weren't pushed forward for one of 2 reasons. Either they had no barriers, or we found a natural barrier that precluded fish migration. The yellows are tributaries we've completed fish barrier and habitat assessments on. And then the 11 green tribs, we have all 3 components done. So the fish barrier, habitat, and fish community assessments done. So last year, we coupled with the St. Lawrence Natural Resources Damage and Assessment, Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration Group, and they had some settlement money from the Ocoa settlement, a contamination settlement, to do barrier removals, and they asked us to do kind of the ground truthing. So we got engaged with them. They had no interest in fish data, so you can see the difference there in the size. So we almost did as many barriers last year as we did the previous 4 years, because we dropped the fish component, because that's pretty labor intensive. In 2016, we'll be working with that group again to kind of finish off the system and look at the Grass River, the Salmon River, and Little Salmon River systems. So thus far, 440 potential fish barriers have been assessed. That red, yellow, green is basically the high to low fish impediment scale, much like a stoplight. So if we focus just on the 47 high-ranking barriers, 9 of those were natural fish barriers, and those are indicated by the red triangle. And the remaining 38 are anthropogenic fish barriers. So again, we haven't assessed every trib yet, but what we have assessed, we've been able to take GIS and then calculate what's upstream of those barriers. And thus far, the total inaccessible tributary to fish migrating from the main stem St. Lawrence is 237 miles of tributary, or roughly 21% of the tributaries. And these are of tribs that we thought were free-flowing, right? So this excludes habitat above natural barriers and then habitat above those tributary, or the dams on the major tributaries. So if we break that down a bit, what we're calling that upper river tributary component, there's about 100 miles of inaccessible tributary. We've implemented 2 restoration projects and restored 28 miles of river, so we put a little dent in that. That's down to 72 miles. Then we look at the lower river component. That's 165 miles. So those same caveats about not including habitat above natural barriers or above those major dams holds here, except that in the St. Regis River, the Hogansburg Dam, which is one of the black chevrons farthest to the right there, in the next year or 2, there's likely that that's coming out, so we moved our scope upstream, which basically the river breaks into an east and west branch. So we went up to that barrier, included all the tributaries below that. So from a 10,000 foot view, what can I tell you about fish? We have enough fish data to, we have a lot. So from a northern pike perspective, those 11 barriers, or 11 tributaries that we completed the migratory fish assessment on and blocked off the entire river, pike are in every stream. We're catching low numbers. We get a dozen or 2 dozen pike in every tributary, and that's kind of what we see throughout the system. Walleye, other than the known locations of spawning on the lower Oswegatchie River and Brandy Brook, we identified kind of a new area, the Little Sucker Brook, where we caught 16 walleyes. There's an asterisk there because that was 2012 when we had 4 80-degree days in March, and we missed some of that. Currently, we have nets in there now, trying to learn more. Then I just wanted to highlight a couple of our restoration projects. So we're out in the field identifying these barriers, and then we have to take it to someone that knows what they're doing, right? So we go to our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, specifically Jan Dodici of our office. He provides technical support. So these 2 projects I want to show you are both basically agricultural crossings, and we've seen it all in the field, but agricultural crossings tend to have some of the highest impediments to fish, and these farmers are just taking anything they can find and throwing in the river, covering it with gravel and driving across it. I mean, we found milk tank trucks with the ends cut off, the tank is thrown in and covered, and propane tanks, and you name it. But this one, I apologize, this is a low flow picture, but there's a 30-inch concrete culvert in that picture. You can kind of see the opening. But at high flow, the velocities are just way too much for fish to get around. So we working with Jan, he designed and we installed a bottomless arch culvert. Everyone's interested usually in price tags. This one was 40 grand, and that's kind of what on the size tribs we're working in, that's what they hover around, 35 to 50-ish thousand dollars. We went back post-construction and did some monitoring to see what sort of fish, just to check the box that fish were getting above that. So of our priority species, we caught walleye and northern pike in this system, along with numerous other native fish species. Brandy Brook is another example. So that picture on the upper left is, these are all historic for the most part, but this one was really historic, like hand-laid rock, and eventually collapsed over time. During high spring flows, water dams up behind it, it runs around on a bedrock sill, and it's just the velocities almost knock you down in 3 inches of water. In a low flow, it just trickles through and no fish can pass. So again, we put a bottomless arch in there. That one was $45,000. We restored 10 more miles of river, and the post-monitoring documented northern pike, along with other species successfully passing. So in summary, we're doing a decent job of building the baseline condition of kind of what's out there on the landscape. The fish barriers have been identified. Following next year, we'll have all the potential barriers and tributaries of the St. Lawrence evaluated. One item to note is many studies kind of focus on that trib road intersections as focal points. And what we're finding in the northern New York, and maybe this is a factor of having agricultural influence, but we're seeing additional 40%, some sub-watersheds up to 60%, additional private road crossings, and some of these are the worst that you can't get without digging into the aerials and doing some field reconnaissance. So we have a better understanding of fish use in these systems, and all our fish data has been incorporated into the DEC fishery database, so there's good baseline being formed there. Now we're able to compare and rank streams for suitable spawning habitat for migratory fish, compare one against the other using the same methodology. And we can prioritize barrier mitigation looking at fish use and that restricted suitable habitat upstream. So we can focus not only on enhancing extant fish populations, but there's a potential to reestablish populations in restored tributaries with suitable spawning habitat. And we can do that either by, with time and let natural recruitment processes take place, or maybe a more proactive approach where we consider, fry stocking in a case like walleye. So with the FEMREF, we're kind of blessed with having funds necessary to complete these mitigation projects, and we plan to continue chipping away annually. In 2016, we have 8 barrier mitigation projects and 1 spawning substrate enhancement project that are in development for implementation next year. So with that, I definitely want to acknowledge Justin Eckert. He's my right-hand man in all this, and kind of last year shepherded the field crew around. This project works closely with the DEC, and obviously all of you know those names, the cast that I work with mostly. Then we have our FEMREF Fish Advisory Committee, and I listed the members that may be present here today, and they're a big assistance in how we implement projects and how we spend those monies. So with that, I take any questions.